Alright everybody, in this video we will talk about cylinders, specifically how to find the volume and the surface area. So, general formulas, if I'm going to write anything down, I would definitely write this down. First, let's start with the volume. So when we're finding the volume of any shape, we're going to take the area of the base times its height. That's going to remain constant throughout any prism that we're dealing with here. So if we look at a cylinder, I can see here that the base of that shape is a circle. So sometimes instead of saying area of the base, I know that the area of a circle formula is pi r squared. So the volume is pi r squared times my height. And the height you can look at as the distance between the two circles. So my height usually I always denote as h. So to write this nicely, volume for a cylinder is pi r squared times h. But again, this is just another way of saying the area of the base times height. So now let's move on to surface area. So for surface area, how you want to look at this is if you're wrapping a gift. So I want to think, what's all the space that's going to cover this shape? So it's a different formula, different measurement. Sometimes an easy way to look at this is kind of by like unwrapping this 3D shape to see what it would look like as a flat surface. So if you pictured making a cylinder out of like construction paper, if I was going to unravel it, it would kind of look something like this. So from here, I could say I have two circles and I have a rectangle. So my two circles have the radius of r, because remember those circles are congruent on the top and bottom there. I have my h I can see when I unravel that, and then that 2 pi r comes from the circumference of the circle. So when I unravel that, the circumference is kind of going around like that. So that's basically where the 2 pi r comes from, just if you were wondering. But all in all you need to know for the surface area formula is I'm going to add all these area measurements together. So the surface area equals 2 pi r h plus 2 pi r squared. And where that comes from is that first part there deals with the area of the rectangle per se, because I'm doing the base times height, so 2 pi r times h. And then the 2 pi r squared comes from taking the area of both circles. So I'm doing pi r squared, but twice. So that's why there's that 2 there in front of it. So here we're going to look at 3 example problems. These formulas are a little bit longer and I would say uglier than a sphere formula, but similar to last week when we worked with spheres, as long as you have the measurements that you need, you literally just plug these in. So the more organized your work can be, the better off you're going to be throughout this unit. So here in example problem number 1, a cylinder has a radius of 2 inches and a height of 14 inches. Alright, so a cylinder has a radius of 2 inches and a height of 14 inches. I want to find its volume and surface area. This problem is pretty straightforward because as you saw in our general formulas, my key ingredients here are finding the radius and the height. And here, they just gave them to both of us. So, what this is going to look like, I have a radius of 2 inches, so if I was going to draw out this cylinder, that's what it would look like. And the height, 14, would go there. So, when I'm finding the volume, I'm doing the area of the base times the height, or in other words, pi r squared times h. And what I'm going to do here is just plug in my radius and height. So pi times 2 squared times 14 gives me 56 pi. If you ever encounter a question where they say leave it in terms of pi, that's basically just, again, where you don't multiply the pi out. So 56 pi would be your answer. If I wanted to write this in decimal form, I do 56 times pi, I get 175.929. And let's say I wanted to round it to the nearest hundredth. I take that 9, see if it bumps up to 2, and here it does. So my final answer would be 175.93. So I found my volume, I'm done with the first half of that problem. So I'm just going to leave that up at the top there. My volume, again, is 175.93 inches cubed. I say inches cubed because volume is 3D. To find my surface area, again, I'm going to write out my formula, and even though this looks kind of ugly, I just have to plug in r and h accordingly. So 2 pi times 2 squared plus 2 pi times 2 times 14. When I multiply all that out, I get 8 pi plus 56 pi. Since these both have pi, I could combine them to give me 64 pi. Again, you could stop here if I'm leaving this in terms of pi, but if you want to have this in decimal form, I have 201.062. If I want to round it to the nearest hundredth to stay consistent, I ask myself, does the 2 bump up that 6? In this case, it does not. So my final answer here would be the surface area is 201.06 inches squared. Squared because I'm dealing with an area measurement here. In the second example, this is really similar, but just one minor detail that's off. In number 2, I have a cylinder with a diameter of 8 meters and a height of 10 meters. Here, I'll just find the surface area. So, looking at the information that they gave me, they tell me that I have a diameter of 10. So it's important to notice in this problem is that they gave me the diameter. So, the diameter would look like this, but I don't want the diameter, I want the radius for this problem. So all I gotta do is change that 8 to be a 4, because I know that the radius is half of the diameter. So that's a key thing here. If you plug in 8, you're gonna get a totally different answer. So just make sure if you see diameter, divide that number by 2. So now I have my radius is 4, and my height is 10. So if I want to find the surface area, I have my formula. I'm going to have that here. From there, I'm just going to plug in for R and H accordingly. I'll get something that looks like that. Multiplying all my numbers together, I get 32 pi plus 80 pi. Combining those, I get 112 pi. Again, could stop here. If I want to leave it as a decimal, I'm going to get 351.858, rounding to the nearest hundredth. Does the 8 bump up the 5? It does. So my final answer is 351.86 meters squared. The last problem that we're going to look at is by far the most difficult. Again, key here, just stay organized with your work, and remember, I need my radius and my height. Once I have that, I'm in the home stretch. So in number 3, a cylinder has a circumference of 18 pi millimeters and a height of 5 millimeters. I want to find its volume and surface area. So again, what I got to ask myself is, what do I need to solve for volume and surface area of a cylinder? I need the radius and the height. So looking at this problem right at the gate, I could see, okay, cool, they gave me my height, but they didn't say anything about a radius or a diameter. All that they told me was the circumference. The circumference is 18 pi, so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to use that circumference and I'm going to work backwards. So I know that circumference is 2 pi r, so now I have 2 pi r equals 18 pi, so now I'm just going to solve for r, which ends up actually being a pretty easy problem. Here, I can take away pi on both sides, so I'm left with 2r equals 18. Last step, divide both sides by 2, and my radius is 9. So, in just a couple extra steps here, I found that my radius is 9. Now I'm going to do the same thing that I did in problem number 1. I have my radius, I have my height, plug them in accordingly to the correct formula. Volume, again, is pi r squared times h. Plug it in. I get this for in terms of pi. And my final answer is 1,272.35 millimeters cubed. For surface area, again, I had 2 pi r squared plus 2 pi r h. Plug in my radius and height accordingly. In terms of pi, I would have this. If I wanted to round it to the nearest hundredth, my final answer would be 791.68 millimeters squared.